What happens aback? A acclimatized announcer refuses to comedy by the rules of aristocratic protocol. You won't acquire what unfolds aback. Meghan Markle sits bottomward with George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America. Assured softball questions and affectionate nods. Alone to face the best barbarous claiming of her post-royal career. This isn't a Loof edition, celebrity account gone wrong. This is a masterclass in journalistic candor affair, bogus victimhood, hidden, and the atomic battle that erupted alive on civic television will leave you speechless. Before we get into this cool story, accomplish abiding. You hit that subscribe button and be an virgin below because you're not activity to acquire what unfolds aback to powerhouses affray in the best afflictive 7 account of morning television. Anytime broadcast. The restriction was apparent from the moment Meghan Markle stepped to simulate the GMA set, dressed in her signature biscuit ensemble. A affected best advised activity both accord and approachability. She acclimatized into the account armchair with the accomplished affluence of Edition who had spent years perfecting the art of accessible appearances. Her smile was camera-ready, her aspect advisedly relaxed, and her easily positioned aloof, so to affectation, the attenuate yet big-ticket adornment that had become allotment of her anxiously curated image. George Stephanopoulos, adept of endless political battles and no drifter to interviewing arguable figures, sat beyond from her with his brand acuteness about buried below a able exterior. The adept announcer had done his appointment in clashing the abject interviewers. Meghan had developed acclimatized to aback abrogation, aristocratic duties. Stephanopoulos came able with questions that cut beeline to the affection of the controversies that had followed her like shadows. The aperture pleasantries were arbiter television, balmy greetings, comments about her appearance, the accepted bureaucracy that admirers apprehend afore the absolute babble begins. But alike in these aboriginal moments, article acquainted, different, Stephanopoulos' smile didn't absolutely adeptness his eyes, and Meghan's responses agitated an association of wariness that appropriate she sensed this wouldn't be the promotional belvedere she had anticipated. Thank you for abutting us this morning, Meghan, Stephanopoulos began, his articulation accustomed that accurate accent that accomplished admirers admit as the calm afore the storm. You've been absolutely alive afresh with your assorted projects and accessible statements. I anticipate our admirers are analytical about the abstract amid your calls for aloofness and your connected attendance in the media spotlight. The catechism landed with surgical precision, anon putting Meghan on the defensive. Her smile faltered for aloof, atom of a second, about apparent to accidental viewers, but abundantly accessible to anyone accustomed with the attenuate tells of Edition, bent off guard. Well, George, I anticipate there's a axiological confounding about what aloofness agency in this context, she replied, her articulation demography on that abstinent accent that had become her signature during difficult conversations. Aback we allege about privacy. We're talking about the appropriate to ascendancy, our own narrative. Abnormally aback, it comes to attention our accouchement and our family's well-being. Stephanopoulos leaned advanced slightly, a action that signaled he wasn't annoyed with the deflection. But isn't there an inherent bucking and gluttonous aloofness while accompanying agreeable and high-profile interviews, documentary projects, and accessible appearances? You've accustomed abundant interviews, aback dispatch, aback from aristocratic duties, anniversary time, discussing actual claimed ancestors' matters. The atmosphere in the flat began to about-face perceptibly. Meghan's media training kicked in as she attempted to achieve ascendancy of the narrative. But Stephanopoulos was an arena by the accepted rules of celebrity interviews. This wasn't Ball Tonight or a affable babble show. This was austere journalism, and he was alleviative, her-like, and he added accessible amount who had fabricated arguable claims. I anticipate what bodies charge to acquire is that aback you're consistently biased in the media. Aback lies are actuality told about you and your family. You acquire a albatross to set the almanac straight. Meghan responded, her articulation, alpha to backpack and bend, that hadn't been there moments before. We didn't acquire to a point with the media. We were affected to because of the connected attacks and the chat affected seemed to adhere in the air, and Stephanopoulos pounced on it with the instincts of a declimatized accuser who had spent decades in Washington ambidextrous with politicians who played fast and afar with the truth. Forced is an absorbing chat choice, he said, his accent actual able, but acceptable, acutely sharper, because from the alfresco attractive and it appears that you and Harry acquire been absolutely cardinal about your media engagements. The timing of your Oprah interview, for instance, came aloof as your father-in-law was ambidextrous, with bloom issues and your grandmother-in-law was in her final months. Some adeptness say that timing was affected to aerate a pulse while aspersing. The family's adeptness to acknowledge effectively, this was the moment, aback, the account confused from afflictive to absolutely confrontational. Meghan's anxiously complete accord began to able, and admirers could see the absolute actuality abaft, the able accessible persona starting to emerge. Her jaw anchored about imperceptibly and her hands, which had been comatose accidentally in her lap, now absorbed the accoutrements of her chair. I acquisition it absolutely black that you would characterize our truthling as calculated, she replied, her articulation assent hardly in both angle and volume. We waited years to acquaint our ancillary of the story. We endured connected attacks, racist coverage, and advised attempts to attenuate our assignment and our relationship. The abstraction that we should acquire remained bashful while our reputations were actuality destroyed is bluntly absurd. Stephanopoulos didn't back down. If anything, her arresting acknowledgement seemed to animate him. As if he had begun absolutely the burden point he was attractive for. But let's allocution about some of these claims, he continued. Affairs out a book that admirers could see independent abundant notes. You've fabricated several allegations over the years that acquire been accustomed by added sources. The Archbishop of Canterbury, for instance, contradicted your affirmation about a abstruse bells ceremony. Palace sources acquire accustomed assorted added claims. How do you acknowledge to critics who say you've been careful with the truth? The catechism hit like a thunderbolt. Meghan's face ablaze visibly, and for a moment she seemed absolutely speechless. This was acutely not the administration she had accepted the account to take, and her ache was acceptable, added accessible to anybody in the studio. I'm sorry, are you calling me a liar? She asked, her articulation now accustomed, an apparent accent of indignation. Because if that's what you're suggesting, I anticipate we charge to be actual bright about what's accident here. The flat fell, silent, except for the about oral hum of the cameras. Alike the aggregation associates seemed a faculty that article cogent was unfolding. Stephanopoulos maintained his able demeanor, but there was an animate in his eyes that appropriately was able to booty this battle as far as it bare to go. I'm not calling you anything, he replied calmly. I'm allurement you to abode the discrepancies amid your accessible statements and the accurate facts. That's what journalism is, allurement, difficult questions, and gluttonous description aback. Belief don't adjust with accustomed facts. This acknowledgement seemed to infuriate Meghan alike more. She confused in her chair, her anatomy accent acceptable added arresting, as she able to barrage. What would become a baking argue that would change the absolute aisle of the interview? But aloof as she opened her aperture to respond. Article in Stephanopoulos' announcement appropriate that he had alike added atomic questions waiting, and the absolute battle was alone, aloof, beginning. The air in the flat crackled with restriction as Meghan Markle straightened in her chair. Her anxiously maintained accord assuredly Alpha 2 blooper abroad. Completely, what had started as a ache had now adapted into article far added volatile, and anybody present could faculty they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. You apperceive what? George Meghan began, her articulation demography on an accent that was according genitalia, arrogant and defensive. I anticipate what's absolutely accident actuality is that your assiduity, the aforementioned anecdotal that the British tabloids acquire been blamed for years. Your demography there, chat over mine, and frankly, I accepted bigger from addition of your stature. Stephanopoulos remained blah by her attack to cast the script. He had faced bottomward presidents, prime ministers, and some of the best able abstracts in all-around politics. A angle tactic from above cable television extra was an activity to derail his following of the truth. I'm not demography anyone's word, he replied with abstinent precision. I'm presenting you with accurate affirmation and allurement for your response. That's how journalism works. For instance, you claimed in your Oprah account that you had surrendered your authorization and driver's authorization, aloft abutting the aristocratic ancestors, and weren't accustomed to leave the country. But we acquire accurate affirmation of you traveling to New York for your babyish battery to Canada assorted times and assorted added all-embracing trips during your time as a live royal. How do you accommodate these adverse statements? The catechism hit its ambition with adverse accuracy. Meghan's eyes widened hardly, and for a moment she appeared absolutely bent off guard. This wasn't the softball account she had acutely expected, and Stephanopoulos' accurate alertness was acceptable. Added axiomatic with anniversary casual minute. That's absolutely taken out of context, she stammered, her accepted ability abandoning her in the face of specific accurate evidence. What I meant was that there were restrictions, protocols that had to be followed. Every crew's appropriate approval, allocation with Aegis teams, and adherence to austere guidelines that about fabricated it absurd to acquire any 18-carat abandon of movement. Stephanopoulos consulted his book again, a action that seemed to accomplish Meghan, added uncomfortable. She could acutely see that he had done all-encompassing research, and her growing all-overs was acceptable, added accessible with anniversary. Casual second, but that contradicts what added associates of the aristocratic ancestors acquire said about their experiences. He connected relentlessly. Prince William and Catherine Acquire announced about their all-embracing travels, and their accounts advance a actual altered akin of freedom than what you've described. Are you suggesting that you were advised abnormally then added associates of the family? This band of analytic addled at the affection of one of Meghan's best austere allegations. And her acknowledgement appeared the abyss of her annoyance with actuality captivated answerable for her claims. Of course, I was advised differently, she snapped, her articulation assent acutely as her anxiously maintained accessible persona connected to crumble. Do you absolutely anticipate the aboriginal biracial American woman to ally into the British aristocratic ancestors was activity to be advised the aforementioned as anybody else? The racism, the bifold standards, the advised attempts to attenuate, aggregate, I approved to do. It was adamant and systematic. Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, his announcement suggesting he had been assured this exact acknowledgement and was able for what came next. Let's allocution about those racism allegations. Specifically, he said, his accent acceptable alike, added serious. You fabricated actual austere accusations about apropos your son's bark color, but a back apprenticed for details. You've been ambiguous about who fabricated these comments and in what context. Don't you anticipate the accessible deserves added specificity? Aback such austere accusations are actuality made. The catechism visibly ashamed Meghan, who began alive uncomfortably in her chair. Her media training had abled her for abounding scenarios. But adverse announcer, who banned to acquire ambiguous deflections and accepted accurate affirmation, was acutely not one of them. I adequate the body's complex by not allotment them, she replied, her voice, demography on a assisting bend that was acceptable, added sharp. But the conversations happened, and they were acutely aching and apropos to both Harry and myself. Stephanopoulos wasn't annoyed with the non-answer, and apprenticed advanced with surgical precision. But after specifics, after context, after called sources, how can the accessible appraise these claims? In journalism, we crave verification, corroboration, evidence. Your allurement, bodies to booty. Your chat about acutely austere allegations after accoutrement, any agency of verification. This claiming to her believability seemed to advance Meghan, accomplished a analytical threshold. Her face ablaze with acrimony and her articulation began to backpack a agitation that appropriate she was disturbing to advance control. Are you actively analytic whether I accomplished racism? She asked incredulously. Are you suggesting that I absurd the endless accessories, comparing me to the aberration and advantage amid us? The way every distinct affair I did was scrutinized and criticized, while innate accomplishments by added ancestors' associates were praised. Stephanopoulos remained calm in the face of her assent agitation. His able abode allegory acutely with her added affecting responses. I am not analytic your experiences, he replied evenly. I'm analytic the specific claims you've fabricated about specific incidents. There's an aberration amid experiencing arbitrary media advantage and alleging that associates of the aristocratic ancestors fabricated racist comments about your approaching child. Those are actual altered levels of accusation. The acumen seemed to infuriate Meghan alike more, and her acknowledgement appear aloof, how extemporaneous she was for this akin of journalistic scrutiny. This is absolutely what I'm talking about, she exclaimed, her articulation now acutely oral to anybody in the studio. Your agreeable hairs, aspersing my experiences, and about calling me a cheat while ambuscade abaft the pretense of journalistic integrity. This isn't journalism. This is aggravation bearded as an interview. The allegation of aggravation seemed to bang a assumption with Stephanopoulos, whose announcement accustomed perceptibly. He had spent decades architecture acceptability for fair but boxy journalism, and accepting his able candor questioned by addition who had consistently abhorred absolute analysis was acutely unacceptable to him. I'm alarmed at the questions that charge to be asked, he replied, his articulation demography on a steelier quality. Questions that allegedly no one abroad has been accommodating to ask. If you acquisition accountability uncomfortable, that says added about your antecedent account adventures than it does about my journalistic approach. This acknowledgement seemed to be the final harbinger for Meghan, who was now visibly disturbing, to advance any affinity of composure. Her easily were arresting the accoutrements of her armchair so deeply that her duke had angry white and her breath had become acutely bank and rapid. Accountability, she repeated, her articulation assent, to a abreast shout. This isn't accountability. This is an advised attack to discredit me and invalidate my experiences. You've fabricated up your apperception of four I alike absolved in here. And now you're aloof, aggravating to breach me bottomward allotment by piece. The flat fell silent, except for the complete of cameras continuing to roll, capturing every moment of what was rapidly acceptable, one of the best atomic celebrity interviews in contempo memory. Production administration exchanged glances, acutely ambiguous about whether to arbitrate or acquiesce the battle to abide escalating. Stephanopoulos' analysis that he was on the border of either a complete breakdown or a affecting exit, absentatively to advance one footfall, added with a catechism. That would prove to be the point of no return. Meghan, he said, His articulation accustomed the weight of years of analytic journalism. Let me ask you about article that our analysis aggregation apparent while advancing for this interview. We begin banking Anil, assuming that you and Harry accustomed abundant payments from Netflix and Spotify, before you clearly stepped bottomward from aristocratic duties. How do you accommodate your claims about actuality, cut off financially by the aristocratic ancestors with affirmation that you were already accepting advantageous ball deals while still alive royals? The catechism detonated like a bomb in the studio. Meghan's face went through accelerated assumption of emotions. Shock, panic, fury, and finally, a algid acerbity that seemed to absorb aggregate else. Her anxiously complete, accessible persona didn't aloof, crack. It burst completely. Absolute article, raw and atrocious underneath. How cartel you, she whispered, her articulation abashed with about independent fury. How cartel, you sit there and act like you acquire any compassionate of what we went through. You acquire no abstraction what it's like to be alone by an institution. To acquire your aegis, bear away. To be larboard, to bulwark for yourself while the tabloids breach you afar daily. Stephanopoulos remained absolutely blah by her affecting outburst, consulting his addendum with the abstract professionalism of Edition, who had asperous endless political storms. But the timeline doesn't abutment that narrative. He connected relentlessly. According to these documents, antecedent discussions with the live platforms began months before your official abandonment from aristocratic duties. This suggests a of planning and alertness that contradicts your claims about actuality, a back cutoff, and larboard with no options. Meghan attempted to her anxiety so abruptly that her armchair formed backwards several feet. The complete alveolate through the bashful studio. Her face was ablaze with acerbity, and her easily were abashed visibly as she struggled to action the actuality that her anxiously complete. Anecdotal was actuality systematically dismantled on a live television. This is unbelievable, she said, her articulation now accustomed, a sharp, about agitated edge. You've ambushed me with selectively edited advice, taken absolutely out of context. And now you're aggravating to acrylic me as some affectionate of artful opportunist. This isn't journalism. This is appearance assassination. The adept announcer looked up from his addendum, with an announcement that alloyed able achievement with aiding carrot affair. For what was advance afore him? These aren't edited documents, Meghan. These are accessible banking filings and accustomed agreements. I'm artlessly allurement you to explain the discrepancies amid your accessible statements and the accurate evidence. This acknowledgement seemed to advance Meghan accomplished any actual affinity of self.